Hello, people, and I want to talk about a couple of big factors that could affect the price of crypto pretty soon, actually. And they're pretty big factors, obviously. Obviously, we've talked about interest rates, and we're going to have to talk about that again because Powell will probably cut them in September. Now, I believe that for any real major movement, because you want the money from bonds to come into crypto, and the lower the interest rates are, the less attractive bonds are, and the more attractive crypto is, especially if you have high inflation, because people obviously want to beat the inflation rate with their yield. Now, right now, bonds are around 4.25, 4.5%, and inflation's around 3. So bonds look very attractive. If inflation goes up, and the Fed funds rate gets cut, which is kind of like contradictory to each other because the Fed funds rate only gets cut when inflation is low, more or less. That will actually promote more people from transferring money from bonds into crypto and stocks. And there's about $7 trillion left in bonds, which obviously can affect the price a lot. So the Fed funds rate, if they cut it by 25 basis points like that, I expect them to. I don't think it'll matter much. It'll maybe do a little bit of inflow, but not much. I think they need to cut it by at least 75. It doesn't really matter if it's consecutive cuts of 25 per meeting or they just cut it 75 at once. I think once you hit that, lower 3 mark in terms of Fed funds rates, people will start investing more in crypto. I think the likelihood of that happening by the end of this year is pretty much 0 at this point, unless I'm mistaken on Jerome Powell and he completely changed his mind, which I don't think he did. We will get that most likely next year when Trump's guy actually takes over. So I wouldn't be counting on too much. I think the September cut is a good starting signal. But I don't actually believe that he's going to cut all that much. And I do think we're going to get one cut in September and probably not too much else after September because both the producer price index and the consumer price index will probably start going up starting in October. Because the second thing I want to mention that will really affect crypto, the de minimis exception. And this is not really going to affect miners all that much because crypto miners cost more than $800, which means they were always subject to tariffs. The de minimis exception is something that small businesses rely on a lot. And it's basically like packages under $800 will not be subject to tariffs if they are imported to the United States. So the end of the de minimis exception, which happened yesterday on Friday in the U.S., will likely lead to higher import costs for small businesses. Now, small businesses are a huge part of the American economy, mom and pop shops, but realistically, a lot of big businesses actually qualify as small businesses. Not really sure what's going on there, but that's just how the American thing works. Forcing many to raise prices, so that means inflation is going to go up. Reduce their product selections or even close their doors due to reduced affordability for customers. Now, I will say that big businesses can easily weather this a lot better than small businesses. So a lot of those neighborhood mom and pop shops should actually be forced to really close or be in tight ropes more or less. While I think you'll see a lot of buyouts from people like Walmart and Target because the corporates will take advantage of that. Platforms like Etsy and eBay, heavily used by small businesses for international sales, are expected to be significantly impacted, potentially leading to a more limited variety of goods available to the US. Now, obviously, if you buy stuff on Temu, you're going to be affected, but that's not the major issue with this. The major issue is a lot of small businesses use this stuff for imports. And if their costs go up, then obviously I think business is going to go down. And it's going to affect the employment rate and also the rate of growth of the US. That might actually exacerbate the need for rate cuts because, that could be really bad for employment. And if employment goes down, Powell needs to cut rates. And if the GDP starts going down because of this, Powell's going to need to cut rates some more. The increased complexity and cost of managing new duties will disproportionately affect smaller businesses that lack resources of larger corporations to absorb these changes or alternative sourcing strategies. Now, that's another thing I want to mention. The cost of the tariffs come in slowly because they've only really been implemented for a month or two, and a lot of businesses did stock up inventory, and as those inventories run out, they'll have to buy stuff at higher prices now. Large corporations, Walmart, Target, etc., will raise prices on some goods, but not all of them immediately because maybe some of them are hoping that it's temporary. Remember, Trump's tariffs did actually get declared illegal by the Court of Appeals. But that honestly doesn't matter too much because he already lost the circuit court. Now he's lost the appeals court. But remember, he's going to appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court because he's not going to take the loss basically lying down. And realistically, like even if he loses at the Supreme Court, he might just not abide by the court's orders because he's the type of guy is like, I'm going to do this until someone stops me. And I'm not really sure if anyone's going to come up and stop him, even if he defies Supreme Court orders. Now, the thing is, like, that's assuming he loses the case at the Supreme Court. Usually the Supreme Court does not reverse lower court decisions, but this one could be different because, remember, Trump has the court stacked in his favor. It's 6-3 conservative. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to win because three of the conservative justices, Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, and Chief Justice, they don't actually always vote in his favor. They're actually like somewhat real justices, whereas Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito are more or less rubber stamps for Donald Trump at this point. So there is a chance that he will actually lose the Supreme Court, although I think the chances of him winning at the Supreme Court is significantly higher than either the Federal Appeals Court or the Circuit Court, which he already lost at. And it's going to take a couple more months. So some of these businesses are probably hoping that his tariffs are temporary and that they'll absorb the costs while the basically courts fight this out. And if it's declared illegal, he won't go against court orders and these tariffs will be over. I'm not sure if that is going to work. There is a very good chance it does work. There's also a very good chance that, it doesn't work. So we'll see how that does. However, if he wins the court case, or if he just decides to go with the tariffs regardless of what the courts actually say, because he's done that a multitude of times with different, with basically like different things, I think some of those costs will definitely be passed to the customers. Because the producer price index, as you guys have seen, is going up, and that almost always flows back to the consumer price index. They can eat the costs for a while, but they're not going to eat the costs for the long term. A lot of the businesses, especially retail, their margins are not that big. It's like probably 4 or 5% average, so they're not going to be able to eat those costs. And with a de minimis exception basically eliminated, not only does that provide trouble for the big guys, it also provides a lot of trouble for the smaller guys. So I can see a lot of small businesses closing shop, being bought out by big businesses, and overall prices going up, which could result in a slowdown of the U.S. economy and basically force Powell's hand into cutting rates sooner. Now, will that actually help crypto? I'm actually not sure, because people will just have less money to invest. But then again, interest rates are coming down, so the big investors might actually jump into stocks and crypto. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag. Overall, I don't think a recession does actually favor crypto. That's my personal guess. But it could honestly work the other way. So those are really, really big things that could actually affect the American economy. So for those of you wondering about the impacts of small businesses employ about 46 to 48% of American workers, with recent data from the Office of Advocacy indicating that's around 45.9%. These businesses are a crucial part of the economy, with the U.S. Small Business Administration defining a small business as one with fewer than 500 employees, a category that accounts for 99.9% of all U.S. businesses. 45.9% of American workers are employed by small businesses. The figure represents about 59 million people. So that could definitely have a huge, huge effect on the American economy. Another good thing right now that we can celebrate is the M2 money supply. And that has actually reached a record high in July. Now, some of you are wondering, what is it for August? Well, we don't really have the charts for August right now. You can see the M2 money supply has essentially been going up pretty much since 1975, but especially this year. It took a little dip a couple months ago, but now is actually going up again. Some people are saying that the M2 money supply has basically a latent delayed effect. And if that's so, we could be suffering the kind of like dip from here to here, but we will soon go up if that is the case. and M2 money supply and Bitcoin are highly correlated. So, Bitcoin typically follows the M2 breakout, and the M2 is definitely breaking out. And it's not only Bitcoin, it's all risk assets typically follow the M2 breakout. Now, that's obviously not 100%. There are other factors, especially in the Trump administration, that could actually affect this. But such surplus liquidity can increase capital flowing into riskier assets like crypto. Bitcoin has historically followed global and US M2 supply with a 3 to 6 months lag. If you actually look at this, realistically, this is probably like May, June. So we're seeing that little bit of a slump right now, especially the beginning of the slump. And we should be getting out of that slump within a month or two, because that looks like essentially like how long that slump is. And as that comes up, we should actually come up. So according to the M2 money supply, we should definitely go way up. And of course, people are saying like the Bitcoin target price is much higher than what it is right now. And it's sitting at around 170K. This was almost 2 months ago, obviously, this article, but that still holds true. It's just that, we had this little dip a couple of months ago. And because of the lagging factor of the M2 money supply and risk markets, that just could be happening a little bit later. So that is another thing that we need to look at, the M2 money supply, because Bitcoin has followed it pretty well. It's not one-to-one, obviously, but it definitely, has its merits. Obviously, Bitcoin's essentially been going up since '09, and M2 money supply has too. But like the various tops and bottoms have actually correlated somewhat with the M2 money supply. So that factor looks really good. I'm kind of conflicted on the macro factor because, the small businesses, that's going to make America's economy suffer if that happens. But that is also going to result in a major cut in interest rates. So it honestly could go either way. Obviously, I'm hoping that it works out really well. But obviously, I can't really say for sure if that's going to be the case. So that's what I have to say for today. I'll let you make your own decisions on it, but those factors could definitely affect it. The rate cuts, whether they're consecutive or not, whether we get 75 basis point cuts really fast, the end of the de minimis exception, and the massive effect it'll have on small businesses that employ almost half of America, essentially. Whether the labor force being negatively impacted that way will actually be good or bad for crypto. And of course, the M2 money supply. Those things you will actually need to keep an eye on. And, it could honestly go either way. Right now, because of the M2 money supply, I'm still pretty optimistic. Plus, a lot of the macro headwinds with obviously the ETFs and other stuff makes me more excited for crypto, and I'm not really that afraid. But let me know what you think in the comments, and like and subscribe, hit the bell notifications button, and subscribe for more signals, and I will see you guys later.